Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Resources for Childcare Programs Impacted by COVID-19. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. When you joined today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. There is a handout available for download in the handouts section of your attendee control panel. We have been experiencing some technical challenges with today's webinar. In the event that the webinar ends suddenly, please do rejoin us immediately, and we apologize for any inconvenience. This webinar is being recorded. All participants are placed on mute for quality assurance. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A sessions throughout at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to turn it over to Kathy Glazer, VECF President. Kathy?
Thank you, Elke, and welcome everyone. We're so glad you're able to join us today. We'll be spending about the next hour and a half hearing from experts with information that we hope will be useful to you, and largely our attendees are for-profit childcare providers, as well as a number of other stakeholders who recognize along with us how important and valuable you and your services are, and we're committed to supporting you, especially during this really challenging environment due to COVID-19. We will be referencing throughout today's presentation a handout that you can find in your control panel. If you click on the handouts banner, you'll be able to open a document that will have a great deal of information and resources at your fingertips, and we ask that you refer to that as we proceed. The speakers that you'll be hearing from in this order that you see on today's agenda will be Jenna Conway, Virginia's Chief School Readiness Officer, Jody Keenan, the Virginia Director of the Small Business Development Centers, Grace Reef with Early Learning Policy Group, Lauren Small with Early Education Business Consultants, and Gary Thompson, who is Chairman of the Virginia Society of CPAs and Chair of the Virginia's School Readiness Committee. Also on the line and available to answer your questions in the question box are experts Kelly Etter with Policy Equity Group, and Becca Ulrich and Christine Johnson-Staub with the Center for Law and Social Policy. We appreciate all of them and the commitment that they have to bringing you up-to-date and accurate information to the extent that we can, again, in a very uncertain environment. And with that, I think I'll turn it first to Jenna Conway. Thanks, Jenna.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jenna Conway. I'm our Chief School Readiness Officer for the Commonwealth, a dual appointment between the Virginia Governor's Office and the Virginia Department of Education. I also work very closely with the Virginia Department of Social Services as we've been helping the early childhood sector respond to the COVID-19 crisis. If you would move to the next slide, please. I wanted to, before getting started and providing an update on where we are in the Commonwealth, thank everybody for joining us this morning. I know that it has been an incredibly difficult period over the course of the last month since this started, and really am appreciative to the Early Childhood Foundation and the national experts for bringing this guidance to you. Thankful to all of the communities and the providers, those of you who have remained open and are continuing to serve the children of our essential personnel, those of you who may have been forced to close and are already kind of thinking, how can I support my families, support my kids, think about recovery. We just know this has been an incredibly difficult time, and we are trying to both be thoughtful about how to support you through this period, as well as how we make sure that we have a strong and vibrant early childhood sector as we come out of this pandemic crisis. What I'd like to do is start with what we know. I know it feels like we've all become with social distancing, all kind of separate islands, and so just give you some of the landscape for the Commonwealth. I'd like to talk about kind of clarifying a few important points about childcare and sort of how essential it is and what all these stay-at-home orders mean for that, and then talk about what we at the state level are focusing on as we speak right now in order to be able to better support you, your families, and your kids. So what we know right now is that, again, that this COVID-19 or coronavirus pandemic has had a significant impact on the for-profit childcare landscape in the Commonwealth. It has an impact on sort of all aspects of early childhood. But since March 13th, all of our K-12 public and private schools have been required to close for the duration of the school year. We also know that all of our Head Starts, generally speaking, in the Commonwealth have closed for the remainder of this year. What we know as of 2 days ago this week is that roughly 62% of our child care centers across the state are closed. So again, 6 out of 10 are closed, 4 out of 10 are open across the state. We know that just over half of religious exempt preschools are closed, and then about 1 in 5 or 20% of our family day homes are closed. So again, across the board, right, know that you're not alone, whether you happen to still be open and scrambling to kind of keep up revenue, keep paying your staff, or whether you had to temporarily close, know that you've kind of got good company in both of those camps. We really see a split across the state. Collectively, as a state, we know that over 24, and actually the numbers as of this morning were 2,600 programs are temporarily closed in the Commonwealth. And for point of kind of, as you think about license capacity, this means that that's a loss of over 200,000 slots across the state. So again, significant portion of closures, right? And it just across the board, a reduction in license capacity of more than 200,000 slots across the Commonwealth. So we know that there are just real challenges out there. We also know that there's been some misinformation, and I want to clarify that childcare is allowed to be open 3 times a week. The governor does a press release or press announcement at 2 o'clock, and we've tried to make sure that even with the executive orders closing the schools, with the executive order related to the stay-at-home order, that it's clear that childcare is allowed to be open, whether that's in a child care center or in a family day home or religious exempt preschool. And so I wanted to make sure that that's very clear. We are asking folks, you do need to comply with the stay-at-home requirements of 10 or more in a kind of a classroom or a sort of delineated space. So, and that includes all adults and kids. And so we know that those of you who are open, many of you are sort of operating a slightly different structure, right? You might have sort of fewer kids, you might be using fewer classrooms. Most folks are not using cafeterias or playgrounds or shared spaces, right? Really kind of keeping these groups separate. And there's some guidance on the COVID-19 childcare microsite or website of DSS that kind of gives you very specific guidance on following the executive orders, while also thinking about how to keep your kids safe, your educators safe, doing things like temperature checks, really kind of keeping groups separate, not having a lot of what I've heard from parents, not having adults come in. That's correct. We also have heard that it hasn't been clear, sort of 2 things. One, that childcare can remain open and that their employees are essential. And so we just produced a letter to the field this week. It's now up on the DOE website, the Virginia Department of Education website, and we will kind of work to get it out across all channels. That indicates that yes, childcare can remain open. Childcare educators themselves are essential personnel, and we are encouraging local businesses to acknowledge this and make you a priority for things like cleaning supplies, milk, etc., if not kind of through the CACFP program, as Grace will talk about later. So that letter was just produced because we had heard that people had some challenges locally, either with authorities or with kind of businesses saying, you're not essential, and we wanted to emphasize, the Commissioner of Social Services and the Superintendent of Education wanted to emphasize that you are, in fact, essential. We are also asking you to focus on essential personnel, and again, we think of that broadly. Obviously, this is a public health crisis, and so our doctors, our nurses, our respiratory therapists, anybody who's working in a health or hospital system or a clinic, a nursing home, are all essential personnel. So are all of our first responders, our ambulances, our firefighters, our police officers. But also, as all of you know, there are businesses that remain open under the stay-at-home order. We need gasoline, we need electricity, we need to be able to eat, right? We need to be able to clean. And so understanding that the personnel that work for those type of companies, those small businesses, those big businesses like Walmart or Target, as well as government employees, should all be considered essential personnel. And again, there's more guidance on defining essential personnel in the FAQs on the Department of Social Services website, but we really encourage people to sort of, take a broad definition of that. So the big update here, yes, childcare can remain open. Yes, you should be focused on essential personnel. Yes, you should be making sure that there's smaller group sizes. And we have a letter for you that you can print and add your name and license number to if you're having any difficulty locally, either explaining why you're open, explaining to parents why you're open, or if you need to use it to go to Kroger or Walmart to get supplies. Lastly, what we're working at the state level, I think there's sort of two key priority areas for us as we kind of come into what potentially will be the peak period of time for the coronavirus or COVID-19 in the Commonwealth. I think the first of which is, and there's been different models out there, but we're between the end of April and the end of May, Virginia will experience this peak, and at least in this wave. And the concern is that the peak is going to put a lot of pressure on your health and hospital systems and first responders. If you look at Seattle, if you look at New York City, right? I mean, we sort of, for states that have, or cities that have had this happen to them before us, right? There's a real pressure on that system. Do you have enough folks to get, individuals to the hospital? Do you have enough people at the hospital kind of to staff for that? And so we want to make sure kind of across the Commonwealth that there's enough emergency childcare. We've been working with communities to do this. The first sort of piece of advice in our guidance on emergency childcare is going to your open childcare centers and family day homes first, right? And kind of going to Childcare Aware as the sort of repository or the place where we're keeping track of who's open and who's not, in addition to licensing, and really kind of going to your private providers first. I think second, we're also asking municipal governments, we're asking school systems, right? We're asking kind of a whole range of folks to think about if your community needed an emergency location because there weren't enough slots or there weren't enough centers or family day home open in the private sector, what would your plan B look like? And so doing that planning to make sure there's enough emergency childcare to get us through the next 4 to 6 weeks. Our second priority is we just found out about a week and a half ago that with the CARES Act, and you'll hear a lot more about this from the national experts over the course of this webinar, but there is a piece of that for which Virginia is slated to get $66 million that is totally intended to support the early childhood or childcare sector. And so we are very excited at the Commonwealth that this was included in the CARES Act. We are very excited that it says in the law that this is supposed to be used to support the early childhood or childcare sector. And so Department of Social Services, Department of Education is working very closely with the governor's office to kind of determine how do we use these dollars and get them out to you as quickly as possible to support. Here's some of the needs that we've heard and that we are considering. I think one of which is to support those centers that are open and remaining open, whether or not you take subsidy or not. We know that everybody's enrollment is down. Everybody is saying that there's a need for additional cleaning and sort of supplies. And so we just know the kind of cost of doing business is more high right now. And we know that you guys have been a critical backstop for your communities in terms of enabling society to still function. So one of the areas we're looking at are sort of additional dollars to go to all programs that remain open. We're also looking at how we might support, if needed, short-term emergency childcare in schools or other settings, just some funding to kind of help that if that's needed over the course of the next few weeks. We know that our programs that take subsidy, but that have had to close temporarily, are also hurting in terms of kind of lost revenue. And so looking at if there's a way to support them, and then looking at our families and looking at things, the law said you could do things like waive copays. And so those are the sorts of things that we've heard from the field are the greatest need right now. We're working closely with the governor, ideally to kind of, make a decision there, get that guidance out to you, hopefully no later than kind of the end of next week. So maybe, maybe sooner, but certainly no later than next week, and kind of come to you with a plan on how we're going to get those dollars out to support Virginia programs across the Commonwealth. So again, we're doing this based on the needs we've heard, and those are programs that are remaining open, whether you receive subsidy or not, some resources, programs that might offer emergency childcare, sort of addressing copays and other kind of expenses for your families on subsidy, and also looking at those subsidy providers that have had to be closed and whether there's some way to support them during this time. So more to come on that, but very big picture, just to sum up, Kathy, before I turn it back over to you, the field has been very affected by the COVID-19, as you see in those closure numbers, and you sort of wrap your head around what it means for our system to lose over 200,000 slots across the state. You are essential personnel, and you serve essential personnel, and we recognize that. And this week we've produced a letter that you can use to sort of make sure that folks understand that if there's not clarity about that, and hopefully to support you as you're working locally to sort of get supplies. And we are working right now to make sure there's enough emergency childcare for the duration of this crisis, and looking at how we in fairly short order can get back to you on how we can spend the $66 million over the course of April, May, and June to help address some of those immediate needs. My one last point before I turn it over is, and you'll hear about some really important and critical other resources coming out of the federal government. I want to be very direct with folks that the $66 million that comes through this CARES Act, at least this aspect that I'm talking about right here, is not going to solve for all of the financial hurt that you all have experienced over the course of the last 4 weeks. And again, if you look at that number, sort of 200,000 slots lost, you think about kind of the lost revenue, if you think about the sheer enormous volume of folks who've gone on an unemployment and might not need childcare right now, right? I mean, it is just the economic impact is extraordinary, and why we sort of take very seriously our responsibility to kind of get these dollars, address some of these short-term needs, and get them out to the field. I think as you'll hear today, we are really encouraging people to take advantage of every potential opportunity, because these dollars just can't solve the entirety of the hurt that you all have experienced. And just want to be direct with you out of deep respect for the work that you do every day. If there are subsequent subsidies, stimulus acts, we will, of course, kind of with each of them, look at the need in Virginia, kind of come back to you with how we can spend it to support the Commonwealth. But it will take all of the resources coming out of the federal government to help address some of the hurt here. And it's very widespread, and just want to acknowledge that and acknowledge your resilience and persistence at this incredibly difficult time. With that, Kathy, I'll turn it back over to you. Unless there's any questions, I should ask if there's questions from the audience.
Thank you, Jenna. I appreciate that. And there are some questions that are coming up, but I think we need to move on now to Jody and hear the information about the rest of the stimulus and other financial resources. We may jump back and talk about some of the good questions that are coming forward, including this issue about kind of the current mismatch in information about the emergency care that's needed and the supply at the local level. But appreciate the information you brought, Jenna, and stay tuned, and we'll turn it now to Jody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. This is Jody Keenan. I'm the director of the Small Business Development Center Network in Virginia. Thank you so much for joining the call today. I know that you're going to hear and receive a lot of helpful information, and we look forward to working with you as you continue to be such a critical component of the ecosystem in your community and in the state. The Small Business Development Center Network is a free resource for small businesses across Virginia. We have 27 offices serving every city, county in the Commonwealth, and we are available to help you even during these unprecedented times. We're serving all of our clients remotely using email and phone and webinar platforms like this to make sure that we're as accessible and available to help you through all of these application programs, which we're going to cover in just a moment. If you could go to the next slide, please. Great. What we're going to cover today are the EIDL loan and advance programs, the payroll protection program that are offered. Both of these are offered through the Small Business Administration, and we'll touch briefly on the small business tax provisions. This slide deck will be available for you, so I encourage you afterwards to visit the SBA website, which will have a lot more detail about these financing programs. And then also our website, virginiasbdc.org, so that you can find a local resource to tap into for assistance. And there's a lot of other tools and resources on the website as well. We are a partner of the Small Business Administration, and by that I mean we get funding from SBA in order to deliver the business advising and training, but we are not a program of SBA, and so we are able to help you at the front end, meaning putting all the application materials together and submitted. And we can help you at the back end once you get approval, or if you've got questions about the approval process. But as far as helping and knowing where your applications are in the system, we don't have access to that. So we'll help as best we can, but I just want to kind of manage expectations about the role that we can play in supporting you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is just a one-page overview of each of these loan programs so that you can compare and contrast and have a sense of where you might fit and plug in to tap into these resources. So I'm going to go through these briefly, but know that there's a lot more detail if you need it, and we can answer questions afterwards as well. Let me start with the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan and Advance. This is, and we call it EIDL. So this is a loan or a grant program that's available directly from SBA. So you will apply directly to the Small Business Administration for these funds. They are intended to cover working capital and to help you cover expenses during this crisis period that are occurring for you. The maximum loan amount you can borrow is $2 million. The amount that you're eligible to apply for is based on 6 months operating expenses. So the application form will ask you for kind of aggregate information, and then the SBA will calculate based on what you provide the amount of money that you're available to receive as a loan. There is an advance or a grant component of this EIDL loan as well. You can receive up to $10,000 as a grant. It's not repayable. You can use it if you get the full EIDL loan, or if you get declined for the full EIDL loan, or if you decide not to accept the full EIDL loan, you are still eligible for this advance or this grant. There's been a lot of confusion around the amount. The maximum you'd be eligible for is $10,000, and it's based on the number of FTEs in your organization or in your company. So if you have 10 or more employees, you'll be eligible for the full $10,000. If you have 1 employee, it's $1,000. So it's $1,000 per FTE. That's a change, so I want to make sure you understand that. And the way you get the advance is you will complete the full EIDL application on the SBA website, and then there's a checkbox at the end of that application that says, I'm requesting the advance. You check that box or select that box. They'll then ask you for your bank account information, the routing number for your bank, and your account number, so that when these funds are dispersed, they'll be dispersed direct deposit. Okay, for loans, for EIDL loans under $25,000, there's no collateral. There's no personal guarantee for the EIDL loan up to $200,000. You do not need to demonstrate that you've tried to get credit or that you have access to credit from some other resource. The grant is, the advance is a grant, so it's forgivable. You don't have to pay it back. And like I said, you don't have to accept an EIDL loan, or you could be declined for an EIDL loan and still get the advance. Of course, you could take the EIDL loan too and get the advance. So I just want to make that clear. The interest rate on the EIDL is 3.75% for for-profit companies and 2.75% for nonprofit companies or organizations. You can repay it over 30 years, or you can pay it early and there's no prepayment penalty. This application is open until the end of the calendar year, December 31st, 2020. As I mentioned, or maybe I didn't, but it's available for small businesses under 500 employees, sole proprietors, independent contractors, and nonprofit organizations and faith-based organizations, specifically 501c3 nonprofit organizations. Okay. The next loan that's available is the Paycheck Protection Program, P3 or PPP. We're calling it P3. This loan is the one that you're hearing a whole lot of stuff about in the news, right? This loan is available and provided from a bank, not the SBA, but an SBA approved lender, specifically a 7A approved lender. You can find SBA approved lenders on the SBA website, and that link was on the original slide, the first slide. You go in, and they have a section called Find the Lender or Lender Match. You put in your zip code, and it will generate for you a list of banks in your geography or in your region, in your area, that are 7A approved lenders. The maximum amount you can borrow through the PPP is 2.5 times the average monthly payroll costs. The payroll maxes out at $100,000 per employee, so any salary or wage above $100,000 is not eligible to be included in this calculation. The maximum you can borrow is $10 million. The deadline to apply for this program is June 30th. As I said, it's open to all small businesses under 500 employees, including 501c3 organizations and faith-based organizations, and this 501c19 if it's a veteran designated organization. The intent of the P3 is to help businesses cover payroll costs and some of these selected operating expenses to encourage employment, to keep people paid and on the payroll if you're operating and your business is open, okay? There's no collateral, there's no personal guarantee. Again, you don't need to demonstrate that you've have access to credit in other places. This loan is not to replace lost revenue. It is to cover expenses related to payroll, interest on mortgages if you own your building, or rent and utilities. The attractive component of the P3 is that there is a forgivable portion, and you can get 100% of this loan forgiven if you meet certain criteria. And those criteria are related to keeping your staffing numbers and compensation levels steady through an 8-week period of time. And that 8-week period of and starts from the day you sign the loan documents, okay? So and there are payroll calculators and forms, of course, attached to help you figure all of that out. 70, as I mentioned, you can borrow money for things other than payroll if they're in those approved categories. But in order to have the loan 100% forgiven, 75% of the funds that you borrow need to be spent towards payroll. If it's less than 75%, then the forgivable portion is prorated. Okay, so it's not all or nothing, but in order to get all of it, you need to dedicate or spend 75% of the loan proceeds on payroll. For the portion that is not forgiven, the interest rate is 1%. And it is, the term now is 1% over, it needs to be repaid within 2 years. So even if you have an unforgiven portion, the interest rate is very reasonable at 1%, okay? Let me think. If you can just go to the next slide, please. The next slide, there you go. We'll cover a couple other points on PPP after I touch base on the tax provisions. There are tax provisions in the CARES Act as well that if you're a company, and most of you will be in this category certainly, that has been impacted by COVID-19, you are able to get a tax credit on the employer portion of benefits and salary that you pay for eligible employees. It's a 50% tax credit. It's against your employer portion of payroll taxes. You can't use this program. In other words, you can't get a credit through this and also get a loan or forgivable loan through the PPP program. So you need to do one or the other. There's no double dipping in this act, or at any time there's no double dipping. You can't get money for the same expenses multiple times. You can use the EIDL loan and the advance and the PPP together. You just can't use them all for the same things. And so some companies are using the EIDL to cover payroll or expenses in advance of the period, that 8-week window. You can do that. You just can't do it all overlapping at this for the same costs. Next slide, please. We're excuse me. We're encouraging businesses and organizations to kind of manage your expectations. I should have led with in the beginning, and I'll say it now, and you'll hear it throughout the presentation. We are encouraging businesses to apply for these funds. Put your application in. Get yourself in the queue. The money is on a first come, first served basis. Congress is working towards adding more dollars into these programs. And we're optimistic that's going to happen, but nevertheless, it's a first come, first served basis. So we're encouraging businesses and organizations to put your application in, get in the queue, and then figure out strategically what you're going to do if you get the money, okay? And I know that's maybe counterintuitive to what you typically are advised from a business advisor. We mentioned that the EIDL advance, the $10,000 is based on $1,000 per FTE. There was guidance and messaging that this was going to be available within 3 days. It has not been dispersed. No one has gotten one of these advances yet, so I would not expect once they get the thing charged up again that you'll see the money in 3 days. The processing time typically for these EIDL loans is about 45 days from the day you submit the application to the money being dispersed. That's the typical timeline. I would not expect it to come sooner. It might come later. So again, all for kind of longer term planning purposes. We're giving you that information. Rules and requirements and expectations are literally being released along the way. So I encourage you to keep tabs on that, either through the SBA website or through some of your resource providers, your accountants, your business advisors and the like. On the P3, this is the application where you're applying directly to the lender, and every lender will have individual requirements as far as documentation, as far as what types of who they're going to entertain to consider for these loans. Right now, most lenders are giving priority to their existing business clients, and that can be defined, again, lender specific. It's typically You need to have at least a business depository relationship with the bank. You probably need to have a business credit card with the bank. You probably also need to have had a past or historic lending relationship or borrowing relationship with the bank. I'm just putting that out as an FYI. You still should apply for the funds. Work with your current bank to start with. If they're a 7A lender, if your current bank is not a 7A lender, then you're certainly able to go to other SBA lenders to submit an application. And I think we talked about the loan forgiveness period of 8 weeks begins on the date of the loan origination. There are unfortunately all kinds of scams, not just related to this, but the IRS as well. So I encourage you to be alert to those and understand that you do not need to pay any fees to apply for either the EIDL or the P3. There's no fees to the borrower. So, and there's plenty of free advice and guidance out there, either through the Small Business Development Center, the Women's Business Center, SCORE, and other parties. So just preserve your cash and don't pay a fee. It's not going to get you ahead of the line or get you any faster consideration. I think that's the end of my slides. Do we have any others? Just go to the next. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take those. I'm looking at the question sheet, so I'll go through that and answer those as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. I think in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next speaker, but there have been a number of questions that came forward in the question box that folks, our experts, have been diligently answering, but also in your comments, Jody, you answered almost every question that's come forward. So it's just, I think, just a repetition that we're in an environment when there's a great deal of uncertainty, when information about timelines and dates are not always, things that have been said have not always come true. And so I think we just have to deal with this, kind of flux and disruption with all of this. But thank you so much for the terrific information. I think next we'll turn to Grace and hear more about unemployment.
Hi, so I'll get started. This is Grace and talk about unemployment. I do want to say, because the information that Jody gave was fantastic, this is a very difficult time for everybody, and some of these pieces intersect with other pieces. So I'm going to talk about unemployment, and obviously it's an individual business decision as to which option may work best for your economic model. And one of the things that Jody said that I thought was really valuable was reaching out to your small business development center, and they might be able to help talk through some of these different options and what it means in the context of your model. And in Virginia, it is a little bit more complicated because, as we all know, there's the limit that Jenna mentioned for public safety, for public health safety, that now there's a limit of 10 bodies in a room for a child care center. So obviously for most, or likely all, that is not the economic model that you originally looked at in opening up or operating your child care program. So that also has a financial impact between, the number of kids you used to operate with based on your economic model and the number that you can serve today under these, emergency precautions. So on unemployment, typically, every state has an unemployment program, and the amount of benefits by state vary. And Congress stepped in through the CARES Act, which is also the same act that funded the SBA assistance that Jody talked about, and said, hey, we know across the states two things. One, we've got a bunch of people who become unemployed who typically are excluded from regular state unemployment programs, such as the self-employed or, can you go to the next slide? Sorry. So typically there are people who will lose their job, who won't qualify for the regular state unemployment program. So Congress stepped in to broaden that safety net and say, hey, we want to provide as much support as we can for people at this time. So recognizing that the regular state unemployment programs might exclude certain people like the self-employed or those working in faith-based programs, Congress created a new pandemic unemployment assistance program, which is conceptually acts to catch those who otherwise would be excluded from receiving unemployment because they don't qualify for the state program. So there's a new federal safety net, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. Generally, people qualify for unemployment based on their earnings, based on their situation. Are you, totally let go, or have your hours been reduced? And so, the state program and the new federal Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program are trying to provide a safety net so that you will be able to fill some of that gap. Technically, whether it's layoff, furloughed, that those words, while I know legally, have a significant difference in the concept of where we are now in this emergency period. It's basically, if there's an impact from COVID-19, then hopefully the state program or new federal safety net program will scoop you up so that employees will receive unemployment. In addition, on top of the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, Congress took a look and saw, hey, across the states, these benefits really vary by a great amount. And typically, they were set at a level that was far below earnings, as in part an incentive for people who become unemployed to go out and look for a job. But right now in this public health emergency, it's in the public interest for people to stay home. And so Congress stepped in and said, for a temporary period, we are going to supplement the weekly unemployment benefit by $600 a week. Now, it's only for a temporary period through July 31st, and it is on top of either regular state benefits or the new Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. I think you are tax-paying rather than nonprofit, and so I'm glad to answer questions about special rules if you are on this call and actually are a nonprofit. But in any event, for self-funded programs, the federal government is going to pay 50% of the cost on that. For employers generally, I think many who operate a childcare program, the first question, could be, wow, my experience rating. I know I've had a low state tax rate because I've typically not laid off people. And so there's a state tax rate that's used to fund state unemployment programs. And generally it's a bit higher if your past record is laying off people. And generally it's a bit lower if you haven't. And so that's called an experience rating. And now the new law is saying, hey, states, you can waive your rules on this. We know there's going to be widespread impact. And even those in the past who haven't typically laid off anybody are going to be caught up in this COVID-19 public health emergency. So just know that, that is something that states have the option to do. And right now, in Virginia, the people at the Virginia Employment Commission are looking carefully to all the flexibility that can be provided and are trying to work out kind of the what's next on it. So next slide. So where do you apply? So it's great. In Virginia, you can apply in either English or Spanish. You can go to the Virginia Employment Commission. They will administer this program, whether it's the state program or the new federal money. The basic idea is a one-stop shop. Their goal is challenging, but to try to make it as easy as possible to make this easy for people to access and get the help as soon as possible as they can. Having said that, I want to tell you how complicated this is. And, at the federal government level, at the Department of Labor, everybody is working remotely. Everybody is basically working 24/7 to get out new rules to keep pace with these massive bills that Congress has passed in the last 3 weeks that have complicated provisions so that they can give guidance to states about what states need to consider and what flexibility they have and what rules they need to comply with. And then at the state level, of course, the state agency staff are also working remotely, trying to receive that federal guidance, trying to make tweaks in the state program. And so I urge you to have patience. I know this is a anxious period, but know that both federal and state employees, I think, are, working double time to try and make sure that they can get unemployment compensation out as soon as possible and in a way that is most pragmatic. So if you do go to the Virginia Employment Commission website, watch regularly for any new rules that are posted. There's a lot to this. For example, states are trying to work out, okay, if I first have to consider if a person is if a person is eligible for the regular benefits, how do I kick them over to the new federal assistance? So some of these are technical things that might require software changes and things like that, but know that people are on it, they're working hard. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen as soon as possible, and hopefully seamless way for those who need to apply for assistance. Big question, how much are benefits? Benefits are based on earnings. Everyone who receives either the state unemployment assistance or the new federal unemployment assistance will receive the 600 weekly supplement, but that does end July 31st, so it's for a temporary period. I will say on the regular state assistance, whether or not that's going to be retroactive will be a decision by the state, but on the base federal pandemic unemployment assistance program, that will be retroactive back to March 27th. And so, if your program did close or did lay off people, in the past couple of weeks, there will be a look back on that. The 600 a week won't apply to that. The 600 a week really came into play beginning March 29th in Virginia. But at a minimum, I think what the concept is and the effort is to make sure as places close or as people become employed, whether fully or partially, that unemployment compensation, is available to them. On the partial payments possibility, so let's say somebody's hours are reduced from 40 to 32, then your income is related to, COVID-19. There'll be some kind of partial payment from the state unemployment program, or maybe federal if you get in through that gateway. And as long as you're getting $1 in that basic assistance, you will qualify for the 600 per week extra supplement. On top of that, just so you know, unemployment can be paid through a debit card or direct deposit or a check. I will say, frankly, when people apply for unemployment, if they can check off debit card or direct deposit, they're likely to get that compensation far faster. Cutting checks on a remote basis and the whole process that's involved in that is likely to delay receipt of that compensation. So if you have your bank account and when you apply for assistance, you're able to put in that information to receive it through direct deposit, that's probably fastest. Obviously, these are all, individual decisions. What I will say about unemployment, just as a reminder, is that it's income. It may be less income than you typically earn, but it is income, and that means it's taxable. And so you may likely have an option to have withholding occur, or you may say, gosh, no, I need every dollar now. And so that's also an option. And last, this unemployment compensation, whether it's the state program or whether it's the new federal assistance, it is not available to those who are undocumented. So you need to be lawfully working in this country to receive unemployment compensation. So I know that was a lot, but I am glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Grace. I'm looking through to see if some of the questions that have come forward would be relevant for the group. Here's a question that I think nobody's been able to address yet that I'll toss out to you. My employees are getting very small amounts directly deposited with no determination letter, and some are getting denied. How can we figure out if people are getting the correct amount?
That is a great question. I think the best answer to that, really, and this is a crazy time because the Virginia Employment Commission is on overload, but I would recommend that they contact the Virginia Employment Commission and ask. I know there's a big notice on the website that says we're not able to give, confirmation numbers at this time. I think things are in flux. I think that's not the best thing for people to hear. But if somebody's been denied benefits, there's a process in Virginia that is, an appeals process, so it can be reviewed. If you think the benefit is not the amount that you should be getting, you can also go through that process. I know it's not the best thing to hear, but I really recommend that people try and call and get through. There's an emergency email on there too, but I can imagine they're flooded with calls, they're flooded with emails. That's not the best thing to hear, but I would recommend people just continue to try and contact the Virginia Employment Commission until their situation can be addressed.
Thank you, Grace. And one more before we move on to Lauren. And Becca, I'll also welcome you to chime in too, as you gave an answer to this questioner. Does an owner of a business who pays themselves weekly also qualify for the additional $600 stimulus through July 31st?
I think the answer to that is yes.
Becca, do you want to flesh out?
Yes, so anyone who is self-employed would be and not eligible for their state unemployment program would be considered eligible for the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, or PUA, program through the Federal CARES Act. So, I mean, you'd still need to go through the application process, but if you are determined eligible through that PUA pathway that Grace talked about, then you would also be eligible to get the extra $600 a week.
Here's how it plays out kind of in real time. If you fall into that category that you come into the pandemic unemployment assistance route because you're self-employed, the minimum in Virginia is $158 a week. That is really low. But the good news, if there is a silver lining, is you trigger that extra $600 a week. So it will be complicated, and the state is going to need to figure out how to make this all work, and they're scurrying now to put that process in place. But that's kind of the economics of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So many questions, and I think we'll likely have a chance to get to a few more of these. But in the interest of time, we're going to turn it now to Lauren to provide her information. And thanks so much to you, Grace.
Sure.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. As Kathy said, I'm Lauren Small. I'm a business consultant and early childhood trainer. I'm also proud to have been a certified business analyst with the Small Business Development Center for over 15 years. My role here today is to take all this information that you've received not only this afternoon, but you've been assimilating for quite some time as we've been going through this, and to try to put it into practical next steps that allow you to navigate this kind of strategically. I know that you've been having to make very difficult decisions with information coming at you from all different directions. And it's still changing. I think that we can all agree. So I can only imagine how difficult this is as business owners and managers. you wear your business hat every day, but this is probably requiring a new set of skills that you weren't quite ready for. So my goal is that you feel a little more confident leaving this webinar, that you feel informed. You're getting the brightest people in our state here talking to you, and that you have up-to-date information so that we come out of this and we navigate this crisis with all of you still in business, with your core team ready to care for children on the other side of this. Our first priority, and I want to just mention it again, is that we do have essential personnel out there that need really good quality, safe places for children, and so that is a priority. Next slide, please. So the first thing I want to talk about, and this is in no order, the slides I'm going to share, it's part of just building your strategy. But one thing I want to share is this incredible document that was put together with, VECF took the lead on this. It's a guide for Virginia childcare, and it's a document that will help guide your decision making. And I think it's easy to get overwhelmed. So we're trying to do things that will help you make good decisions and simplify. So the first part of the guide is a knowledge guide, and it's basically summarizing with a childcare lens these programs that you heard about today, as well as some other things that are still important to the conversation, like the new requirements for employers for leave. There's information, and our industry is already really good at disinfecting and keeping clean, healthy, safe places, but there's information in there related to that. And the CDC has just had great information out for schools, and I know all of you have been watching that. And then the second part of that guide is the risk-benefit assessment. Many of you have already made your decision to open or close, but if you're considering reopening or still working through that, there's a piece of this that just does this risk-benefit so that you feel confident in the decision you're making. There's so many different scenarios out there, and you have to look at your situation separate from other people because there's just too many elements to it. And then the last piece of this guide is helping you to walk through a process to really navigate this financially. At the end of the day, we have a business model that has to work at the end of this. And some of you may be looking at that cash flow situation weekly and trying to fill gaps pretty quickly. Some of you may have more of a cushion and can look at it monthly, but this tool is going to help you navigate it. It's available on the website earlyeducationbusiness.com, as well as the spreadsheet that we're going to talk about is there. Next slide, please. So tuition strategies has just come up over and over in the conversations with owners and directors. Many of you may have already made a plan for how you're going to work with families regarding their tuition. But I want to encourage you just to take a moment to pause and reevaluate this. Many of the decisions around this were made several weeks ago before we knew that we would be put on these restrictions till June 10th. So it may be worth kind of reevaluating. My mantra with everyone is to try to capture as much revenue as possible, whether you're open or closed. And let me just explain that. We know we're an essential workforce. Everyone knows that now. We know also that when, June 10th, hopefully, many families are going to need childcare and immediately have to get back to work. And they're going to need us to still be there standing strong to take care of their children with staff ready to care for kids. So in order for that business model to work, it has to work financially. I know I'm not telling you anything you don't need to know, but asking families to continue to pay tuition, even if they aren't using their service, is a highly recommended best practice. Many of you are discounting that fee, which is fine. You have to figure out what works for you and your families. they have purchased a spot in your center, and if they want to still continue to be enrolled, they have to continue to try to contribute towards that. What we found is that communicating with families honestly and frequently with care and attention is working really well. There's many families that are keeping their kids at home, but they're still working, still receiving income from their employers, and they value and care about what you do. They care about your teachers, and they want you to be supported during this. So ask, just ask. It's okay too to look at this on a case-by-case basis. You know your families and their situations, and this is an instance where one shoe doesn't fit all, so I'm comfortable with that. For those families that are paying and staying home too, continue to think about creatively, and we've all been pushed onto the online world, but think about how you can still show value for early care and education in a different way, remotely with online learning. Our teachers are so creative, and we're just seeing the coolest things happen online with educators still connecting with the children at home. And then think creatively, be innovative. Perhaps this is a time where you don't do things the way you've always done it. And so you consider taking on subsidy if you're getting those calls and you see a need, and that's this would be a time to try that. We know there's lots of school-age kids out there that may need care. Maybe you haven't done that before, but thinking creatively about your tuition strategies. Next slide, please. As we talk about, revenue, and you've seen these great, hopefully we're able to take advantage of the disaster loan programs through the SBA and the PPP and all these things, but perhaps there's a gap that has to be filled in your cash flow stream. And so I want to just bring up your level of knowledge in terms of being creative with your finance. You may have to explore some different things. So traditional financing would just be getting a regular business loan, personal loan, whatever from your bank, a commercial loan. And just so you're comfortable with the terminology, a secured loan means you have collateral. And unsecured means you have no collateral. Typically, unsecured loans are microloans less than $25,000. All loans typically in this realm are going to look at credit. And I think this is bringing up, a lot of us are becoming aware of how important our business credit is. And so that's a side note, like continue to be aware of that and build that strength there. All lenders, you'll see with all of these, are looking at your ability to repay loans. And that's why it's so important to do these cash flow projections that show them that you have a plan and you can repay the money. SBDCs are really good at helping with this stuff. This is the #1 call that they get. I put on this slide donations. We've seen a lot of centers doing really well asking for help, whether it's in supplies or financially. I would also encourage really having someone dedicated to looking and uncovering business grants. We're seeing them pop up, and you have to be quick to hop on them. Like your economic development departments are a great place to, they're kind of a housing place for a lot of these small business supports. So I would definitely be in touch with them and looking for them and ready to apply. Home equity loans, I just put that on there as an option. Retirement accounts, we don't want to have to do that, but you should be aware that the penalties for early withdrawals have been waived right now during this pandemic. So it is something to be aware of. And then the Virginia Small Business Financing Authority has a child care loan program that's funded through Department of Social Services. It's an underutilized fund that has been around for quite some time. I just don't think we childcare providers always know about it. It does have some special requirements. Right now, they have reduced the interest rates to 0% for existing loans as well as new loans. And they've expanded who this is eligible for. So pretty much any provider out there is eligible for this loan program. The details are on the website, Early Education Business. The big thing with this program you have to be aware of is that the money can only be used for tangible items. So that means purchasing vehicles, fencing, mulch, equipment, cots, cribs. Yeah, I know you get the picture. You have to have tangible things that you're using these loan proceeds for. Next slide, please. Managing expenses. I think that we're all very acutely aware of how we're spending money right now. And it's incredibly important that you're going through every expense, every place that the center spends money, and eliminating non-essential expenses. Our largest expense in this industry is, of course, our labor costs. Typically, we analyze that, particularly when we're doing budgets, by turning it into a percentage of revenue. Industry averages tend to be anywhere from 45, some of you up to 65%. I think that this situation, and many of you are already doing this, are very good at going deeper into how you analyze your labor costs. So what I'd like to recommend is that you're using some type of spreadsheet or tool to look at each classroom, number of kids, how many staff you need there, and what it's going to cost you, and really having the capability to go deeper to get real numbers on what your labor costs are going to look like. With these 10-person rules, it's changed a lot for many of you, and impacting the business model. It's costing a lot more. So having the capability to run different scenarios is vital as you configure classrooms to try to at least break even as we go through this crisis. Also, it enables you to look at your admin overhead, your cooks, everywhere in the program that you're spending money. And also, we've had a lot of success in encouraging business owners to negotiate with anyone that they typically pay money to, and going through your most expensive things, which are typically your, your mortgage or your rent, and trying to negotiate deferred payments if needed, reduced interest, or really seeing if they'll work with you so that, again, when this is over, you're still standing. I think a lot of business owners are not comfortable having those conversations, but I assure you that everyone, it's an industry recommended practice right now to have those conversations. Your landlord will not be able to rent this space at this time to someone else, so it's okay. Negotiate. Next slide, please. I've mentioned cash flow projections, and cash flow projections is really just a budget with some an added line that says when these things happen in this period, and typically they're done monthly, where is our cash at the end of this period? And so it really enables you to run scenarios to understand what your cash position will be. I'm sorry, someone in my house just turned on the vacuum cleaner and it distracted me. So as you're looking at your cash flow projections, obviously we're trying to understand when these loan proceeds, when the timing is, and it enables you to kind of look at exactly when we're going to have a problem. And I think that's what we're really trying to do, is to get you very confident about your cash situation and to be ahead of this so that you're not so stressed wondering how you're going to manage through this. It's a much more proactive, strategic, smart business owner way to approach these. Again, there's the sample of the spreadsheet. Oh, it's not a sample. There is a spreadsheet on the website. There's many out there that you can use. It's been customized for early childhood, and it will guide you through projecting your revenues and projecting your expenses. And you can do it weekly, you can do it monthly, but you need that information so you know where your financial gaps are. Next slide, please. And I put in the chat box because I realized I updated this slide. So I'm just going to send that to everyone so you can see what I'm talking about. This was from yesterday. You know, when I think about next steps and practical next steps, I think we all can realize that if we don't have a plan, we need a plan really quickly of how our business is going to navigate this. And there's lots of things to look at, but right now I'm talking about the business model. Jody recommended this, and I completely agree that you got to get your applications in for these funding if you haven't done it already, for the PPP if you're going to go that route, the disaster loan, which has a grant element. It's requiring paperwork. We've got to just stop for a minute and get those things together and apply for those programs. And I mentioned it, and I think I would encourage that you try to, if you don't have time, to get someone on your team, and it may have to be a spouse, looking just for business grants and applying for them, because they're coming up every day. I'm seeing 1 or 2 programs flowing. So I want your eyes on that so that you can take advantage of them. I would recommend your current customer base, whether they're attending or they are holding a spot, or even if they've withdrawn, but you know that they'll be coming back, I would be communicating with them frequently, but also shoring up when they're going to be coming back so that you can know what you're dealing with. I suspect there's going to be a lot of families that have lost their jobs and they may not be coming back on June 10th or whenever we're kind of back to business as usual. And so there's going to be this kind of rebuilding strategy, probably for most providers, where we're not operating at the level we were before. And so I think this is the time to be thinking about how you're going to rebuild your program, how you're going to have your grand opening, and what your marketing plan is going to look like. We know that the social media is working really well. And so if you're not using social media to connect with families, to market, I would encourage you to use some of this downtime, you know, once we get these applications out of the way, to start building your foundation in these really core elements of your business, which marketing is definitely one of them. This is also a time to look at how you're operating. And Kathy and I have had many calls, and we know that our industry needs to do things a little differently and better to be more resilient. Part of this time we could be using to build our business systems and our business infrastructure and really have more automated, streamlined processes that set us up for success. We know that there's going to be a lot of people out there looking for work. We are going to have a labor pool that we can pull from, and this would be a time to look at hiring practices, job descriptions, handbooks, and really beef those things up. And then most importantly, really look at your onboarding and how you train and how you coach and mentor, and really shore that stuff up to be as strong as possible. And there's lots of good stuff out there to help you with that. Look at the shared services platform. I put the website there in the chat box, vasharednetwork.org, which has thousands of templates and tools that you can use to do this kind of great, this kind of work. And then the last thing I'd like to mention on this slide is just, we're going to see this incredible opportunity for advocacy in our industry. We already knew that we were essential personnel. Now everyone else is realizing it. We also know that we're not just essential today so parents can work, we're essential because we're one of the most important times in a child's life for learning, and that we're really building the future. And I want to encourage you to think about your role in advocating for our industry. We're often so busy that we don't have time for that, but this may be a nice moment to pause and really take advantage of the opportunity to promote our industry at this much higher level, to advocate for higher wages, benefits, all the things that we know we need with this very fragile business model. Next slide, please. And then lastly, I just want to direct you to our resource website. Everything that we've been talking about, you can go to this website as a portal to get you to things quickly. We've been trying to update it as soon as we get information to be a relevant website for early childhood providers, for directors and owners. And it's broken down into kind of these main categories. These webinars will be on there as recordings, so you can go back and listen to them, because I know there was a lot of information. And that's all for my part. I thank you so much.
Thanks so much to you, Lauren. Folks are noting their appreciation of all the resources and all the information that every speaker has provided. I think that we have time now to do a few kind of rapid response questions and answers. So just give a heads up to each of our presenters that I'm going to be coming to you shortly. Lauren, I will kind of follow yours up with a question that someone noted as you were talking. What if I work with 95% low income families that are not paid if they don't work?
So someone can help me out here, but I think that, again, we have to be careful we don't go to that this isn't going to work, and look for solutions. Even if you have 95% families that aren't working, work with the subsidy programs and understand what can come your way for your business model, and then let's start filling the gaps. And I know that sounds like an easy solution, but I know you can navigate this when you really tap into all the information and the resources. If you're serving 95% subsidy families, we need you. You're serving our most vulnerable children, and there's a way to kind of help you navigate this. So I know I don't have an easy answer, and I'd have to think about it, but I would look at it strategically and use these tools that we're giving you and figure out what your plan is moving forward. And I know this is
hard. Jody, next question is for you. We had a number of questioners interested in any information about the processing time for P3 and kind of what our responses or things to check with that might be variable depending on the lender. Can you comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, the response time will vary lender to lender. The general process, as I'm understanding, is you will apply to your SBA lender. The lender will make an approval decision, which then they need to send to SBA to get a loan number, if you will. And once the loan number is given, then the banks are still waiting for some closing documentation guidance from SBA. So the loan approval from your bank could happen, internal approval, right, could happen very quickly, a few days. And then when they turn it into the SBA, that also happens very quickly. But as far as the loan closing documentation guidance, and there may have been something that came through this morning on this, I haven't had a minute to check, but once they get the loan closing documentation guidance from SBA, then they can, book the loan. I'm understanding that the whole process can take up to 2 weeks before you would get the cash deposited in your account. That's what I'm understanding as of yesterday.
Thank you, Jody. And just as a follow-up to that, how long could I defer the disbursement of funds for the P3? I don't want the money until I'm ready to reopen.
Yeah, I think that's lender by lender specific. So you need to talk with your lender about that. The PPP program is open until June 30th at present. So it's going to need to be between now and June 30th as we currently understand the guidelines.
Gotcha. Next question is for Gary, and it follows on to that. Can you talk a little bit about what you've heard or understand about the timeline for processing the EIDL, and are there ways that folks can check the status of their application?
Sure, thank you. It certainly has varied a little bit, and it seems to be moving a little more rapidly the last few days. But my experience with clients has been 10 to 14 day turnaround in discussions back from SBA, and then another 10 days before funding takes place. There is on the, where you went and applied for EIDL on the website, there is an icon where you can go in and check the status. And if there's nothing to say, then there's really nothing there. It'll just say it's being processed. But I have heard from several that based on email platforms that people are using, there's been some kickouts of emails. Particularly, I've heard Yahoo, AOL, where they're getting information back that's not making its way through filter. So it is good to go in and check status, both on PPP, but specifically, Kathy, on EIDL to go there.
Thanks, Carrie. Appreciate that. Becca, someone has asked, and I think you've been able to respond, any idea when the Virginia Employment Commission will be ready to take sole proprietors and self-employed for unemployment?
Yes, so we don't know when the program will be fully up and running and accepting applications at this point. What the website says is that they'll have an announcement about roughly when the program will begin sometime next week. So that's the best information that we have available at this point.
Gotcha. Thank you. Jenna, the next couple of questions are for you. The first one I think will be a little easier to answer than the second. First, can you give information again about where folks will find information when decisions are made and an announcement comes out from the state, and then where they may apply for the funds that may be available to them?
Yeah, there will be an announcement for the state that will be, likely covered kind of through one of the governor's press announcements. So either Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. And then the best place would be the Department of Social Services childcareva.com, their COVID microsite. So if you go to childcareva.com and then go to the COVID section, that's where you have the joint guidance, the letters, the FAQs. So that's where we would post information about whatever changes or sort of uses of the CARES Act funding.
And there would also be information about where to go to apply.
Yes.
Thank you, Jenna. And then the second one was a question that we got early on about someone being concerned that there's not actually a shortage and that adding local municipal organizations or schools is not helpful. We have tons of open spaces and zero interest in emergency care.
Yeah, no, and we appreciate that. I think, we're seeing this in Virginia as well as across the country as folks are wanting to make sure you have enough capacity, but also being kind of thoughtful about what exists. I mean, I think we've seen this in New York, where everything from, sending in a boat to serve people, which only on the first day saw one. We also saw this in New York, where they opened schools and had far fewer parents send kids to the emergency childcare in the schools than was anticipated. And so we're trying to both pay attention to what's happening nationally and also working, in partnership with the foundation, with Smart Beginnings, with kind of school divisions, to have people keeping eyes and ears open. We've tried to be explicit in all guidance that, the sort of experts in the field are the existing centers and those that are open. And we've emphasized that to our superintendents. We've emphasized that to our municipal governments, our boards of supervisors, right? So don't reinvent the wheel. On the other hand, we've been tracking, as I noted earlier, the numbers of closures and don't want any community in Virginia to get in a place where the private centers are closed and there's no ability, for instance, for the governor to mandate a private center to open. And yet we have a hospital, right, or sort of a health system that, needs emergency care. So I think what we're trying to do is make sure that sort of schools, for instance, which could be mandated to open, are prepared. My general sense from most communities is that, that if they think they have enough capacity, they're doing some planning, but not necessarily opening unless there's really a crisis and it's needed. So, and this is moving day by day and week by week. But I agree with the the sentiment that if it's not needed, there's no point, right? If you've got capacity in your private market to be sort of sending kids into schools. And in fact, parents wouldn't prefer that, right? I mean, I think they prefer the smaller settings. They prefer to go to the center where it feels kind of more kind of, just smaller settings, safer for their kids. But, again, as we hit the potential peak, which looks like it is now closer to being at the end of this month, we don't want any sort of community to be in a place where they don't have safe places for kids to go, or at least I'd say more likely don't have a plan for that. So great point from the audience.
Thank you. And I'll put, one issue out there that is coming forward, and just invite any of our presenters to weigh in on this. There are some concerns about the unemployment payments being more actually than folks typically get paid. And does this provide a disincentive for those workers to return into the roles that we need them so much for? Anybody want to weigh in on that?
Well, I'll start, and then others may have comments, Gabby. I mean, this was a difficult situation for the federal government. So they knew they needed to, create a safety net. They knew that typically unemployment benefits by state are very low, and that was insufficient to support families at this time of a public health emergency. So they tried to figure out what's the best way to supplement that and by how much. And so the 600 will result in some situations where people can make more off unemployment than they could be by wages. But I think, one thing to consider is, while imperfect, the reality is people need help at this time, and some people won't have a choice. They'll have to be home. Others will work in a business where they're let go and don't have a choice. For those that are open and thinking about whether to reduce staff, or is it the best thing to let them go on unemployment that can actually make more, I think those are going to be individual decisions. And I also think the people have to recognize, who are working in these centers, hey, if I jump on this, robust unemployment system, and for the next, 2 or 3 months or whatever time it might be, get this extra supplement, that's great for me now, but I may have no job later. And I know today, I got an alert, there are all these super email alerts now from everybody. But one economist was saying, unemployment could go to 14 or 15%. So if there's a choice, I think employees need to also balance, it might be better off in the short term, but boy, if unemployment skyrockets at 15% and my business has closed where I worked and enjoyed working, and I got that short-term benefit, but now I'm in the boat of unemployment with everybody else, and that ramp up to full employment could be a long time, and that extra 600 ends July 31st. So if I go back down to, $158 a month beginning August, that might not be in the best interest of people. So offhand, it looks like, wow, such a rich benefit, more than I make now. But if people grab that, the long-term consequence to them could be far worse. So I think, if employers can encourage their employees to think about it in that way, that will add to the conversation.
And this is Becca, just to jump in really quickly to add to what Grace shared, which are all really important points. So one other thing kind of specific to UI, unemployment insurance, that's important to keep in mind is that the whole point of the program is to keep people connected to the workforce. And in fact, most states have actually pretty kind of onerous reporting requirements that require people who are unemployed or who are partially unemployed to be actively searching for work. And there are some efforts to relax those requirements in certain states for people who have kind of specific coronavirus unemployment circumstances. But the whole idea is that, unemployment benefits are short-term, and people who are receiving them are going to have to find a job to go back to. The other thing that I would mention is that, and Lauren made this point earlier in her presentation, is that you know, our system was already struggling holistically to begin with before the coronavirus crisis really hit, right? And so this is just sort of showing the cracks or putting a magnifying glass on cracks that were already there. And so this is really an important moment for all of us to be advocating for, robust public funding, to be advocating for better wages for our early childhood workforce, and to really be kind of connecting all of these dots to continue to make the case for why the field is so important and why providers deserve wages.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. This is definitely a very thorny time. I want to thank everybody for your time today and talking through some of these really important topics. Our presenters, thank you so much to you, and our attendees, thank you for attending and for all of your good questions. We'll work through this together, and we're going to let Gary close us out today. Gary?
Kathy, thank you. And given the time, I'll just do a quick wrap up. Thanks to Kathy and the VECF, to all those that were participants today as panelists, to Jenna and the administration for their great work during these uncharted territories. You know, just a few weeks ago, many of us on the phone were celebrating some historic wins for early childhood in the General Assembly and administration's leadership. And that seems like an ancient memory now as we face some pretty big challenges. I just want you all to know how thankful we are for the essential role that you play in early childhood and frankly in our economy. And we feel your pain. We want to be of assistance to you. And we recognize that the challenges that you face are different person to person, provider to provider. So allow us to continue to be that resource. For some, you need to hurry up and jump on something. For others, it's going to require a bit of patience to really understand what the options are and make decisions that are midterm in nature. So recognize that while maybe not all of your questions got exactly answered today, we do want to continue to be a resource, and I hope that you will avail yourself of the resources that are in front of you on the screen, and of course, you'll be getting PowerPoints to help you with that as well. There's certainly no playbook for any of this, and we are eager to get to the other side, but in the meantime, please allow us to be of any assistance. No matter what your size or feeling of readiness for this, we are certainly pleased to help you. We're proud of you, proud of the role that you're playing. So I'll take a deep breath and stay as calm as possible. Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing serving you in as many ways as possible. Have a good afternoon.